Hi. As you know, the Center for Mark Twain Studies Summer Teachers Institute 2021, because of COVID, had to be canceled. But then there's canceling, and then there's canceling. So while we're not in person on the porch, while we did not have the Zoom, that is not stopping Jocelyn Mack, Matthew Seybold, John Grassi, and I from still coming to you with resources for the classroom. So here we go. The topic for this summer's institute was the journey motif, poetry, and Mark Twain, and that has made all the difference. Yes, I know your English teachers out there, particularly 10th and 11th grade, caught on that it is indeed Robert Frost. But let's get first into the journey. What does that word actually mean? Does it always have to be physical? And while Matt is taking one aspect of this concept, I'm taking the other of, for our students, how can they or how do they define journey? Is it always going somewhere? And I've come up with the idea that absolutely not. There are many different types of journeys on which we embark. We ourselves as teachers and as just people, individuals, parents, students, lots of different journeys of life that don't necessarily involve packing up, getting on a plane, in a car, or whatever, and going to a place, a destination. So this time we're going to look at the various journeys that made Sam Clemens and Mark Twain so unique to American history, fiction, politics, the social fabric of his time, and of the 21st century. For me, I divided it into the personal, the cultural, the linguistic, the economic, and finally the travel. So let's just take a few of those ideas and think about not the prose in the sense the novels with which we're all so familiar. No novels this time. It's strictly Mark Twain's poetry, his essays, his speeches, the interviews, and journals. And let's say from the personal, did you know? We know that Mark Twain fell in love with Olivia Langdon and he had this wonderful family, and a series of tragedies ensued that continued to hone his journey, not only as a man and a writer, but as a husband, as a father, but also the people he met. And given where we are in the 21st century right now, 2021, I thought I'd give you a concentrated list of people I want to focus on who encountered Mark Twain and whom Mark Twain encountered. Example, George Griffin, John Lewis. We have Warner McGuinn, Marianne Cord, Booker T. Washington, I bet that one sort of surprises you, and Frederick Douglass. Those people he personally encountered, and they encountered him. And with each of those journeying moments, Mark Twain, Sam Clemens, was not the same as he was prior to that encounter. And so we're going to drill into that and figure out through his writings, where can we see those shifts and eddies and motifs? The same with the cultural. In so many ways, when one looks at not only what I listed with Twain, but even his telegrams back and forth to Olivia when he was on the road, and he continued to keep asking, whether he was asking it literally or emotionally, who am I? What am I doing? Our students ask this question all the time. Who am I? What is my identity? How do I become my own person? And more importantly, what is my voice? In a poem that he writes called Genius, I have actually seen students in schools, particularly the Commonwealth Governor's School in Virginia, come alive with that poem and start, you can see the processing that they go through, the scaffolding of, well, wait a minute, that's how he defines genius, so what about us? How do we fit into that? So here's a poem that very few teachers are aware of, but think about how you could get the students involved in just understanding, who am I? Can I be as smart as somebody else? What does that mean, being smart? What does it mean, being curious or inquiring? Again, linguistically, very few authors can actually capture language and write it so that we can see it and we can hear it and we can experience what that dialect sounds like or those conversations. Twain was one of the best listeners in terms of authors I've encountered. And trust me, I've encountered thousands of them in writing and research. But the idea that Twain could actually write speech patterns and make us feel that we know these people and we're not laughing at their dialect, that their dialect or their language patterns are part of their identity and who they are. He does this in his writings. And one poem that is just so well written that takes you straight into an entirely different continent even is A Sweltering Day in Australia. So you'll have that poem too. The economics, most of us know that Mark Twain was the worst businessman probably on the planet. Olivia was probably the best manager for him on the planet. Still, Twain was plagued by bills, even on the road, in telegrams that I have been graciously provided by the Folger Shakespeare Library. He talks about the finances, so he's constantly worried. He wants to provide for his family. And you push that forward to where our students are now with reports, even from the American Psychological Association, tracking the Gen Zers, where they themselves say they are concerned about the economy. They worry, they fret about money. So to have Twain's poem, those annual bills, it's surprising. It gives them a fictional distance where they can look at another person who was this famous writer who actually had to think about and deal with and be frustrated and fretful over bills, and giving them a moment to think that they're not so different, they're not the outliers, that they're not sinking, that Twain and his family did come through it with working together and with focusing. And also on the travel. Kids now are familiar with celebrity, musical celebrities, actors. They really don't necessarily think about, at one time around the world, artists, writers, musicians were sought out for what they were thinking. And none more sought out than Sam Clemens Mark Twain around the world. Interviewers wanted to know his thoughts on everything from politics to the social fabric to what was he writing next to what was his thought on education, on the import and impact of women, the import and impact of children, race relations. They wanted to know what his thoughts were at that period. He was quoted, he was interviewed, he gave tons and tons of speeches on some of these issues. And so we have Twain's literal travel around the world. And we also have his virtual travel, where he allows us to travel back in time and see how other characters performed or what their thoughts were or how they developed, how they interacted. So we go on those journeys with them. And the same with his poems as we begin to read them, or the interviews and the journals. We begin to see his thought processes and how they worked and what motivated him and how he changed with each of these encounters with suffragists of his period or with abolitionists and with others. So I want to ask you a question. What do you think W.B. Du Bois, Gloria Anzaldúa, Langston Hughes, Gwendolyn Brooks, Walt Whitman, Julia Alvarez, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and Toni Morrison all have in common? Their appreciation of Mark Twain. And so I want to bring this full circle because in so many ways, what has made and continues to make, and I hope in the future will continue to make Mark Twain so important a voice, is that his journey, his life's journey, made all the difference. So I'd like to quote the last part of Frost's The Road Not Taken. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Mark Twain could have easily, as a Southern writer, stuck to his Southern roots, like so many did, but he didn't. He took the road less traveled by, and for all of us, that has made all the difference. So look for the resources on the Mark Twain Center for Mark Twain Studies site. They're coming.